Welcome to the first of Woodlands of Ireland's Biodiversity Week 2026 events, entitled Carlow Catchments Hedgerow Survey Results and Ash and Elm Research Updates in Ireland. Today's webinar is divided into two presentations. The first presentation focuses on the results of the Carlow Catchment Hedgerow and Other Wooded Lands project. It's jointly presented by Neil Foulkes, a Hedge Conservation and Management Specialist, and myself, Joe Gowran, CEO of Woodlands of Ireland. Woodlands of Ireland was commissioned by the Carlow County Council Biodiversity Officer Shane Casey to run a 3-year project looking at how the county's hedgerows and other wooded lands can contribute to improving water quality and biodiversity. This will be followed by with a presentation by Dheeraj Rathore, Teagasc Forest Development Department, on Ash and Elm in Ireland, protecting and restoring our native trees together. Dheeraj will give details on how ash and elm are iconic parts of Ireland's landscapes, yet both face serious threats from disease. This webinar presentation will explore why conserving these species matters for biodiversity, heritage, and future forests, what research is underway to support their recovery, and how citizens can play an active role in identifying and protecting resilient trees. Thanks to our Executive Assistant, Trevor Seary, for dealing with the technical aspects of running this webinar. And please put questions into the chat. We will answer those as best we can in the time after the two roughly 20-minute presentations. And also note that the presentation is being recorded. I'll hand over to Neil now.
Thank you very much, Joe. So what we're going to talk about for the next 20 minutes is the results of the Carlow Catchments Hedgerows and Other Wooded Land Survey. The term other wooded land has its own unique definition. It's a UN term, which basically means any land that's under tree cover, which isn't classified as a forest. So that would include hedgerows and those small little blocks, little spinneys and copses, little blocks of land that are not forests. Just to give a little bit of an overview of the county of Carlow, what we have there is an image of Carlow, where the Environmental Protection Agency land cover maps have been used, and we've extracted both the tree line and the hedgerow elements from those maps. So what you can see in Carlow basically is areas here that are unhedged, primarily in the Blackstairs Mountains, the Collection Hills. It's also areas up around Oak Park where the hedgerow network is fairly weak. What you can see is that the hedgerows in the south of the county are more dense. The hedgerow network is more dense in the south of the county. The bigger area here is where you've got a lot of big agricultural fields. The survey itself wasn't focused on the whole of Carlow. It's focused on 2 river catchments, the Burren Catchment and the Mountain Catchment, which included 9 river subbasins. You can see them in the image on the left-hand side there. The pink are the 6 river subbasins of the Carlow Catchment, and the orange are the 3 subbasins of the Mountain Catchment. The brief for this project, which is a 3-year project, was to look at the hedgerows in those 2 river catchments in terms of a geographic spread, looking at different farm types, and particularly we were looking at features of with strong riparian influence and where biodiversity was an issue. Or potentially an issue, how we could improve the biodiversity of the hedgerows and also improve riparian protection as well. So as part of year 1, we did a sort of a research exercise, a desktop research exercise. We also interacted with people from ASAP and ACRES in terms of what they thought would be a useful input into their work. We identified then 47 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre squares. They are the grey areas that you can see highlighted. And we particularly focused on water bodies where the EPA's pollution impact potential mapping had identified key pollution impact potential points. And we were looking at hedgerows that could it could be interacting with those points. In total, we identified 95 hedgerows that we did a very detailed survey on. Just to put it back into the original context there, then the area highlighted in pink is the actual catchment areas, the two catchment areas, the Burren and the Mountain catchment that we looked at in the context of the county as a whole. So what did we look at? We looked at basically 5 different categories of information. Context of the hedgerow in terms of its history, its agricultural setting, in terms of how it relates to water and the general environment. We looked at the species composition of the hedges in terms of 3 different layers: the tree layer, the shrub layer, and the ground flora layer. We also looked at the structure of the hedge in terms of the height, the width, the gaps, and also what we'd call the associated features, which would be the bank and the drain, including the size of the bank and the drain. We also looked at hedgerow trees and the proportion of hedgerow trees and the age structure of hedgerow trees. We looked at connectivity, how the hedges connected with other hedgerows, with other semi-natural features in the landscape. So we didn't look at them totally in isolation, but we looked at how they interacted in their wider environment. And we also looked at the management of those hedgerows in terms of how they were managed, and even the historical management as well. So I'll hand you over to back to Joe, who's now going to talk about what we actually found.
Thanks, Neil. What we found was good species diversity with some interesting finds, particularly in relation to spindle, which was quite significantly different than many other counties that have been surveyed in recent years. 71% of the hedges in the surveyed area, we reckon, were at least 200 years old, but they are showing effects of aging with gaps and just the structure changing over time into tree lines as distinct from managed hedges of a lower height. We could see evidence of nutrient-rich ground flora, and one of the most significant invasive species that we saw evident in some of the hedges, but also along roadways as we travelled around Catchment, was Himalayan balsam. Generally, there was good connectivity in terms of hedges linking with similar habitats, particularly other hedges. And just on the ash dieback, which Dheeraj will talk more on in his presentation, we found that aspect encouraging. We'll go into a little bit more detail in a few more slides. But overall, in terms of favourable condition, and this is favourable condition is coming from the definition and the methodology used in the hedgerow appraisal system, which we will have a workshop on next week in Oak Park, and we'll give you more details of that shortly. So a low percentage were considered to be in favourable condition using that criteria. We could see evidence of land restructuring from the first edition Ordnance Survey map in Carlow, which is 1839, and the second edition Ordnance Survey map. And we have some images relating to that further in the presentation. So just the frequency of different species, the recurrence. Hawthorn obviously featured in more than 88% of hedges, and just mentioned about the spindle was unusual. You'd see it there at 24% of hedges contained spindle, and some of those hedges actually contained more. You know, there was 1 or 2 hedges that were possibly up to 30, 40, 50% spindle, which was quite unusual. We just mentioned in these images now the name of the townlands where the particular species were seen, and obviously we translated the name of the townlands, got the English from the Log Anam website, and also the date when that name was first recorded in available literature. Which kind of gives us an indication that elements of the Carlow landscape are medieval and possibly early, certainly a farmed landscape from Norman and pre-Norman times is evident. So only 9% of hedges had no trees, in that they were you just had the shrub layer. But where so most of them had trees, and in this case, this image here of oak, you had hedges which were there was quite significant proportions of mature oak, and we could see natural regeneration occurring in adjacent grassland. Now, not necessarily surviving more than 1 year, but there is potential there for seed collection, for example. Presumably these would be Quercus robur. Then we can see oak in former hedge lines as well. So there's some quite impressive features there in relation to oak. Then black poplar was seen in 3% of hedges. This is one particularly substantial specimen. Then we also had aspen in a number of hedges. And just on that, there is research going on black poplar and aspen to try and encourage them to be included in the planting programs, whether it's in hedges or in native woodland establishment or native woodland conservation. Wild cherry, what we see here, that's in 3% of the hedges sampled. But we did find that there was concentrations of certain species in certain parts of the county. Wild cherry more on the upper catchment, I think. Oh, down the, so
In the mountain,
in the mountain catchment, and then spindle on the lower grounds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this particular one hedge, we see that the name is Quill Conurach, and the date 1552, with the species diversity then combined with that, and the fact that it's still existing there, would suggest that it may potentially be an element of ancient woodland there. And just then other hedges, 61% had one or more fern species. This particular image up at Coolest Nocta had, I think, 6 or 7 fern species in it. Lichens were evident in particularly older trees or areas where there's more shade. The global warming is influencing the lichen populations are retreating more towards the west of the island. So it's a very specialized area, and I'm not competent to elaborate on that. But it's an area that would require certainly more researchers and more people to develop a competence in, because some of those populations are under threat. Some unusual aspects. This is what's called Robin's pincushion, that's developed on a wild rose, and it's caused by a gall wasp. I'd taken the photograph, but actually only till this morning did I realize that Neil was telling me what exactly it was. So just small unusual features. Obviously, we're picking up on some insect activity, the damselfly here. Then we also had the solitary bee habitat in a hedge bank. Actually, I noted came across some fox cubs. I nearly tripped over down on the bottom of one of the tillage fields on one of the days we were out. And then just passing back over to Neil now on.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more, a bit more statistical information about what we found. When we're looking at the survey, we're looking at a lot at the history of the hedge. We'll look at the old maps, but modern hedgerows from sort of mid-19th, late 18th century, 19th century onwards tend to be straight. They were laid out by surveyors, done in straight lines. So anywhere where you come across a curved boundary, it's generally an older feature, particularly if it's not associated with a watercourse. Often the curve in a feature is down to the fact that it's a watercourse. But 23% of the hedges that we recorded were non-linear, which is fairly high. The reason probably is that a lot of the hedges that we looked at were actually farm boundaries, because there's been a lot of rationalisation of hedgerows since probably the 70s onwards. A lot of internal hedgerows have been removed. So what we're seeing is the older farm boundary hedges, the more historic boundaries. There's a townland boundary hedge. Looks fairly insignificant when you look at it until you look on the maps. And if you look in that hedge, you can actually see bluebells. It's one of the few hedges that we actually saw bluebells growing as ground flora, which would be a good indication of an old woodland origin to that piece of land. 23% of the hedges that we looked at were townland boundaries. We looked at the context of the hedges. Carlow has the highest proportion of land in tillage, I think, of any county in Ireland. 25% of the adjacent land use to the hedges we looked at was tillage, which is exceptionally high. I think in Leitrim it was 0 when we did the Leitrim survey. Improved grassland was the main adjacent land classification, 58%. So Carlow's a very good agricultural land, a county of good agricultural land. But that, in a way, shows the importance of the hedgerows, that if you've got a large area of improved grassland, there's very little there for nature, and the hedgerows are the repository. When we went down, I was expecting a lot of very small, very tightly managed hedges, but you can see the hedge in the background there with a drain, and there's plenty of volume to that. It's a really, really good biodiversity feature. We looked at the structure of the associated structure of the hedge, whether there's a bank, whether there's a drain, a ditch, a wall. 60% of what we looked at had a hedge bank, and 1/3 of those, 21% in total of what we looked at, the hedge bank was over 1 metre in height, and they're significant features in their own right. They provide niche habitat for a lot of different species. They also make the hedge wider, because you can see there where you've got plants on either side of the hedge bank. It means that you're not having a very narrow bank. This is a substantial feature for nature, and also as a nutrient buffer. Ditches and drains, a lot of the time those banks that we're seeing were made by cutting a ditch or a drain. 61% of the hedges we looked at had an associated ditch and drain. The one on the left is very interesting, because what looked to us from the maps to be a continuous hedge, the drain actually runs along one side and cut through and was on the opposite side of the hedge for the other part of it. So sometimes the associated features of a hedge actually tell you part of the history of the landscape as well. Stone walls, 17% of hedges had stone walls. That there in Ballynamona is particularly good examples. Absolutely top quality stone wall with an associated hedge. Some of the stonework around the gateways in particular was exceptional. Very, very interesting part of the feature. Again, they were concentrated the walls were concentrated into certain parts of the county. Just taking a landscape view, that's a view back over Carlow from the townland of Ullsnocht. We looked at the connectivity. We looked at how the hedges that we were looking at connected into the wider landscape. Generally, because there's low woodland cover, it was actually connections with other hedges that were significant. So 84% of the hedges connected at one end or the other to other hedgerows or other semi-natural landscape features. It shows how important that issue of connectivity is. That's one of a particularly interesting shot from my point of view. If you look at that photograph on the top of the hill there where the pointer is, you can see a small block of forested land. Think for the rest of that photograph, if you took the hedges out of that photograph, there wouldn't be any tree cover at all. I think even the block here, if you look at the mapping, they are just hedgerow trees linking into other hedgerow trees. It just shows how significant a feature of the landscape the hedgerows are in well, not just in Carlow, but particularly in Carlow. There's the opposite, where there's been a lot of rationalisation and hedgerow removal, and you have this area where there's virtually no tree cover at all. If you look at the date where Worcesterstown would be a Norman name. So that's a Norman landscape, and it shows there's been agricultural activity there for a long time. But what we've seen, I expected a lot more of these big areas without any hedgerows, but in actual fact, they were few and far between, the areas where you almost have a prairie landscape. Hand you back to just a little bits there. In terms of management, 46% of the hedges were receiving some form of routine management. A lot of the time it was just the facing up of the hedge so that it wasn't actually growing out into the fields. There was some examples of boxed management and hedges kept a little bit small, but in general that wasn't as much of an issue as I'd probably expected to see before we started the survey. Very interesting photograph there from Lacken of it, would be hedge laying, or even more. I would say here where the old stem. This is going back many years. The stem was laid across. And in this case, I think the person who did the work was trying to get this bit here to root into the ground, so to fill a gap in the hedge. So you see, you can read the history of the management in some of the hedges, and 7% of the hedges had showed evidence of hedge laying. Back to Joe, who's going to look at some of the issues that we identified.
Thanks, Neil. We found gaps in 63% of 63% of hedges surveyed had 10% gaps or more. Now these could be easily restocked and to resolve that. Open base in 36% of hedges. This reduces the agricultural and biodiversity value, and also the stop proofing would be reduced as a result of that as well. Nutrient-rich ground flora was occurring in 48%. You can see there's a lot of nettle there. Now that's actually picking up overland flow of nutrients, but it's also then between it and the cleavers, it's reducing the space for other native species to exist. So there's kind of a double-edged sides to that. Herbicide use, a very small percentage, only 5%. This is probably the worst aspect or case of it there. But very little, just things like spray drift on a small, we're talking very small percentage of hedges where that was occurring, but it is something that could be eliminated altogether. Ash dieback, which Dheeraj will go into in more detail. We found healthy and sick mature ash side by side, but overall we found that in terms of the grading of the extent of disease, with the least being class 1 and with some disease at class 2, and then the ones that are severely affected at 3 and 4. Found that 80% were in least affected categories, classes, and 19% were badly affected by ash dieback. So there was kind of a hopeful aspect to that. Alien species, we'd mentioned about Himalayan balsam earlier, occurring in 2% of hedges, but we also saw it extensively on roadsides, as I mentioned earlier. Back to Neil now, just on some other aspects.
Yeah, as Joe mentioned, the survey was conducted. The methodology that we used was the hedgerow appraisal system, which is something that Woodlands of Ireland was instrumental in introducing. In that survey, we use the data that we record to accord a significant status to individual hedges, based on the history, species diversity, the structural component, and how they connect to the wider landscape. There's also an element where landscape significance can come into it, but landscape significance is very difficult to quantify or to qualify. So what we found, and you can't see it on the right of the image there, but 67% of hedges would be classed as being significant in one category or other. 35-36% were historically significant townland boundaries, older boundaries, boundaries that were identified on first edition Ordnance Survey map. 26% were considered to be significant in terms of the species diversity. That's pretty good. Also, in terms of the structural diversity, which would be a large hedge bank, a large drain, or even the presence of a lot of mature trees would increase the significance in that category. The habitat connectivity is low on the basis that the way that the methodology works, it tends to favour connections with woodland habitat rather than other hedgerows. I think it's something that we need to be looking at the hedgerow appraisal system in terms of, because I think in terms of what we saw in Carlow, habitat connectivity significance is more significant than it would appear in that image. The hedgerow appraisal system also attributes a condition score to hedges, again based on the height, the width, the gappiness of the hedge, various different criteria. Generally speaking, a score from 12 upwards is considered to be okay, and anything above 12 you're okay. Once you get below 10, you're into a situation where you should be looking at some form of intervention to try and improve the condition. Few images there of hedges in favourable condition. As Joe said, I think earlier on, only 8.5% of the hedges that we looked at actually passed all of the favourable condition criteria. That doesn't mean to say that all of the other hedges were bad. It's just that they had some feature in them that could be improved. If anybody's interested, particularly in how the hedgerow appraisal system works, we're doing a workshop next week on the 22nd down in Oak Park, and you can book that. Joe will probably give you details as to how you can book your place on that if you're interested. Just going back to the channelization issue, this is a particularly interesting example near Ullard Bridge outside of Fenner, where the first edition Ordnance Survey map on the left shows a meandering river. By the time the second Ordnance Survey was done in 1907, that river had been straightened, townland boundaries had been realigned, and there was a big difference. And you can see it actually in reality. That's the field that we were looking at the hedgerow in, and you can see the old bridge and the bridge arches. Very interesting feature. Just handing over to Joe.
Yeah, just some mapping there where data provided by the Ancient Woodlands Ireland project to show townlands in the Greater Carlow area there that have woodland names associated with them. Yeah, just on the catchment there, you can see where there's particularly in the central area there, there's basically those ones that show light green. We would have had concentrations of woodland there in the medieval period, and the townland names have persisted to give us some evidence of that. So the next steps, we will have further consultation with Carlow County Council, Shane Casey, the Biodiversity Officer, to develop a stakeholder engagement plan, and also to identify best practice sites and demonstration venues to bring farmers, landowners to visit. This will involve some of the farmers we met, possibly as farm ambassadors on this. But also, we're looking to develop pathways for implementing the survey recommendations in Carlow. So every hedge has its own as unique stories, and particularly when we spend time talking with farmers, we do all interesting details that you don't necessarily pick up using a strict methodology. Now, we'd like to see a discussion forum on a national level coming into place, about the conservation and active management of hedges, and that'll come into our conversation in next week's events. And so after the questions and answers, after Dheeraj's presentation, which is coming up next, we'll talk about the other Biodiversity Week events we have, particularly the one in Oak Park in Carlow next week.
I'll just flick through very, very quickly some images. There's the Biodiversity Week. Joe, just to give credit to Joe, Joe took all of the photographs during the survey work, and he took some really, really interesting and very good quality images, particularly like that one of the riparian zone. A few images of what we consider quintessentially Carlow. The granite piers and the oak trees were something that were very, very distinct to the area that we're in. There was Kiltennel Church, just an old church ruins and graveyard in the middle of agricultural land. That was a very unique feature. The viaduct at Boris was also something you couldn't be anywhere else to take that photograph. And just to finish off,
Yeah, so Mount Leinster featured from in right across the catchment. I took dozens of photographs with Mount Leinster in the background. That's just one of them there. So that concludes our first presentation.
Thanks very much, Joe and Trevor and Woodlands of Ireland for this opportunity and hosting this webinar as part of Biodiversity Week. And as Joe kindly introduced me, my name is Dheeraj Rathore and I'm Tree Improvement Researcher within the Forestry Development Department of Teagasc. And today we are going to talk about ash and elms in Ireland and why do we need to protect them and restore them as our most important native broadleaf tree species. So Joe has already talked about it and showed that there are trees growing in our hedgerows, and you all are very much aware of how important ash is in current landscape, Irish landscape, and some of you would remember how elms were in before the Dutch elm disease came in. So this is just to say that hedgerows are very important, and within the hedgerows, ash is the second most important tree species that grows. Here is just some stats about how importantly it contributes to the biodiversity. Almost 1,000 species rely directly or indirectly on ash for food and habitat and etc. It has excellent timber quality, which you all know. The most important one is the making hulls for our national game hurling, and we are going to lose ash. If we lose ash, we lose the touch with the trees, and it's important in our cultural aspect. The dieback disease came in 1990s from Eastern Asia into main Europe land. First detected in 1992 in Poland, and then it started to spread across the continent. And you can see the dark zone here. Sorry, just one second. Here, you can see here where the darker zone is. That's where the center point of spread happened, and it spread both ways, the left and the right of the image. And then by 2012, it was detected in Ireland, in Wicklow here somewhere. And then the spread started from that center point to the rest of the country, and it has now been well established across the country. And that's the way the disease spreads. The disease is caused by the fungal pathogen called Hymenoscyphus fraxineus, a little bit of mouthful. But I'll just walk you through the disease cycle here. So in late spring, early summer months, when the weather starts picking up more like how it is nowadays, day temperatures 18, 20 degrees highest, and then there is humidity, high humidity. Fungus really likes to multiply, start releasing spores from the dead debris on the forest floor. And these microscopic spores, which is here an image, magnified image, they travel with wind, land on the leaf canopy. And once they land, they start causing these brown necrotic lesions. The lesions then travel, or the fungus then travel through the midrib and veins of these leaves, causing these brown necrotic lesions. Brown necrosis of the leaf tissue. When the symptoms are more severe, they travel from those twigs. The leaf canopy was here, travel through this twig into forming these diamond-shaped lesions. If the tree is susceptible and the environment favors the pathogen, these kind of lesions can happen across, a ring can form, and that kills the tree suddenly. Then in autumn months, all this leaf debris falls on the forest floor. Fungus remains quite dormant on forest floor over the winter months, and these epithecium, mushroom-like structures, start forming in spring and ready to release millions and billions of microscopic spores when the right time comes, cause the disease cycle, and that is why the name is given dieback. It kills to certain part, it progresses to certain parts to certain extent within the tree, and then it goes back into this phase and comes back again until the whole tree succumbs to the dieback, if the tree is susceptible and the environment is favoring the pathogen. Here are some more symptoms. You can see leaf necrosis, shoot necrosis, wilting, this orange color discoloration, which is very distinct symptom of the disease. These diamond-shaped bark crankers and lesions forming. This epicormic growth, which is not as much as visual here, but you can see it here. And it's very straight growth, very, very fast growth that happens because the tree is trying to survive. So here is another picture of a hedgerow tree, a brilliant ash tree in its time, but because it was susceptible to the dieback, it started showing all these symptoms of crown loss, epicormic growth, and very little leaf canopy left in midsummer. So the question there is, can we really find any healthy trees? And if they are there, the tolerant trees, where are they? So up to 5% of trees are highly tolerant, and this tolerance is highly inheritable. So if we bring these tolerant trees together in a small area which is protected from contamination of pollen coming from outside, then there is a very high chance that the progenies will be highly tolerant as well. Where do we find these trees? So this is a picture from a plantation in County Cavan. And here, all these dead trees, but then you see this tree right over there with really nice crown. And that shows that there is resilience in the trees. This is another example. You can see all these dead ash in the background and nearby, but then you see this tree, very nice canopy. And then this is the picture of the hedgerow there where I showed you one of the tree was dying. That was this tree with severe symptoms. But look at this tree right over here. I don't have the next updated picture of this tree. This particular hedgerow, I would have really liked to show it to you. And at the moment, the landscape looks very distorted because all these trees, including the healthy one, have been removed from the hedgerow. And it is very sad to see that happening. So what Teagasc is doing in terms of breeding, very early days when the disease came, it didn't establish as much as it's now has widely spread, but Teagasc researchers is collected signwood, which is the recently previous year growth, collected that from 15 different European countries and established the first gene bank since 2012. The Dieback came, and this was established in 2020 in Castlemorris Woodlands, owned by Quilcher in Kilkenny County. This comprises of around 208 H genotypes representing 15 European countries, and we are collecting data on their tree health twice a year from those gene banks. We also have another copy of the same gene bank, but a smaller number of genotypes based on our first year of assessment from Castlemorris Gene Bank, that we decided 165 trees are performing better, and we planted them in Phoenix Park. Here are a couple of examples of healthy looking trees. One of them is in Castlemorris, the other one is in Phoenix Park. What we also did, we collected cuttings, which is signwood, from healthy looking trees at an early stage of disease establishment in Ireland. And we collected cuttings from 1,000 trees. And this was the work of Jerry Douglas, who retired in 2019. And this material was sent to Lithuania. And why to Lithuania? Because the disease came in 1990s. And if we send the material in 2016, 2017, the disease had enough time of 15, 16 years to establish and create a high disease pressure area. And once that material was gone to Lithuania, it was grafted, field trials were established, and we got around 35 of those genotypes, which is around 3.5% of the total population that was being tested in Lithuania, that it was performing better than the remaining population that was collected. We got the cuttings of those 35 genotypes back in Ireland, we grafted them, and now this is under a field trial in Oak Park, Teagasc. We are collecting data from that trial, and we are closely monitoring the health of those trees as well. And then within this time frame, a very timely project came. Funding came from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, jointly funded by the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs from Northern Ireland. And this is all island approach towards preserving and reviving ash as a commercial and biodiversity source. It has four main aspects. The project is called as Ash for Future. It has four main aspects. Ash communication, directly talking to public, engaging with public, and doing as much possible to communicate, disseminate our results, ongoing research, and get general public involved. And I'll talk a bit more about this in next slides. Then Ash Gen is about selection, propagation, genetic work, marker development. And this is again to validate the results that we see from field work. Is that really durable? Is it in the genes? Or is it just environmental factor? And for that reason, we have a very large work package working on the genetics part. Then in the Silva part, which is silvicultural aspect, we are looking into two different aspects. How would we grow ash in future once we have resilient genotypes? And for that, we are testing it in monoculture, but we are also testing it with mixed species. We have selected certain amount native and non-native species to grow ash and do the field trials. And this field trial will happen for the first time since Dieback came in end of this year. The second part of silviculture aspect is the regeneration hotspots. So some ash produces really good amount of viable seed, and it throws that into the inner forest. Research has shown all of this, and based on these observations, what we are asking and doing is some people and some of the general public, forest owners, Coilche, and Teagasc ourselves, we have access to our forest land, and if there are 1 by 1, 2 by 1, 2 meter square space where a lot of ash seedlings are growing, we mark that, and I'm going to show you results in next slides. We mark those and we observe how many of those trees continue to survive for next 5 years. And probably that becomes the tolerant material for breeding in our breeding program. And the last one is the ash path. We have talked about tree physiology and tree health all the time, but we haven't investigated how pathogen is establishing. Is it becoming more violent, means more aggressive, or is it calming down? How does it grow how is it adapting to our climatic condition? How will it be in 50 years time? So that is the kind of research we are doing through a collaboration with University College Dublin and a PhD student to look into the pathological aspect of the disease. These are the funded organizations, Teagasc, FB in Northern Ireland, and UCD. And these are our partners who are non-funded, but they are supporting the project in great deal. And I'm really thankful that they are on board. So for this communication side, we have a Ash for Future webpage, along with Report a Healthy Ash Tree webpage. And all you type in Google is Report a Healthy Ash Tree, and it will bring you to our webpage. What it has is all the information, how to identify trees, but most importantly, what are the tree class categories of trees that we are looking for? How can you really contribute? We have simplified the scoring strategy here. Very simple. Class 1, where you see a very healthy looking tree which has full crown, up to 75 to 100% crown is very intact. There's no epicormic growth, and the neighboring trees are dying. And believe me, this tree is very close to this tree here in class 4. So it's one of the best ones that I have seen myself in my 5 years in forestry. And then class 2 is there where around 50% of crown is intact. Class 3, we are less than 50%, and class 4, severely infected tree. This QR code will bring you directly to Report a Healthy Ash Tree webpage. If you can't go there, you can directly write to us on ashforfuture@teagasc.ie. We really encourage and request any of you and your friends and family members, if they have any sightings of class 1 trees, please report them to us. And it will really help accelerating the breeding program. Just a little bit more on how our citizen science aspect is going on. So when citizens are, here is the map that is showing the trees that were reported and have been sampled from all the counties in Ireland, along with field trials. There are 5 field trials established, one here in Ballyhaise. There are 2 in Dublin. There is one in Oak Park, Carlow. There is one in Kilkenny. There is one in JFK. And then there are these star shape are the hot spots, which you can see here. These are the hot spots here in different counties across the country that we are observing. And these are mainly on private lands where private forest owners have agreed to leave around 1 to 2 square meter space where there is higher ash regeneration, and they leave us for us to observe it year after year to see how many of those seedlings will continue to thrive. Here are a few more pictures here. This is Dr. Ricardo Pimenta, who is the postdoc who communicates through Ash for Future email address at the moment. And he's looking at one of the healthy tree in our gene bank when we go out for scoring. There is another picture here where there is a highly tolerant tree that we are sampling and getting the signboards. Then they get grafted, they go in the glass house, and they grow there. And here is the full team that works on different aspects of ash breeding. In 2024, since the launch of Ash for Future project, we got around 70 reports. We sampled around 200 trees and we grafted around 2,400 trees in the glasshouse. This year, we have got a lot more reports with our media outreach activities and public engagement and interest into supporting this initiative. We got around 330 reports. We only could collect 190 trees because we were limited with the root stocks. We have grafted around 1,700 trees from those. They are in the glasshouse now, and they'll become part of the field trial in a couple of years' time. Which brings me to the next aspect, which is the Dutch elm disease. This is much older disease, and we only have a one-third of a project working on it. So we have a PhD student, Karuna, who is here. You can see in this picture sampling a healthy elm. The disease is caused by 2 fungus strains. One is Ophiostoma ulmi, which causes the first epidemic, and then more aggressive strain came, which is Ophiostoma novo-ulmi, and it caused the severe devastation. The disease travels the disease is spread by the beetle, the bark beetle, and the bark beetle lays the eggs within the tunnels on the tree trunk. I'm going to talk about the disease cycle in a minute, just to show you the image of bark beetle, the galleries that are caused by the larvae which were feeding on the tree trunk, a dead elm here and a healthy elm here in the far right picture. The disease cycle. So when beetles come in, they make these tunnels and they lay their eggs. When the eggs hatch, the larvae feed and they causes these galleries. But also when the larvae becomes an adult, the fungus spores, they grow and they form these mushroom kind of structures where there are billions of spores available. This is the cycle that is happening in there. And these ascospores are attached to the body of the beetle all over. The beetle flies, goes to a healthy tree, starts feeding on the leaves and the twigs and branches, spreading and leaving those spores there, and then laying the eggs also in the tree trunk for the next disease cycle. So this is one cycle. The next cycle happens when the fungus enters the plant xylem tissues. It starts developing these conidia and grows rapidly to block the water supply. And once the water supply is blocked, we see leaf wilting, defoliation, crown damage, and the tree dies. There is another part where the disease can also spread once the disease travels down to the root structure of an infected tree, and due to physical damage in a healthy nearby tree, the transmission of the disease can also happen. These dead logs, when raised on the forest floor, they become the house of these eggs of the larvae, the beetle eggs and the fungus, to simultaneously survive over winter months and then thrive again. And they continue this cycle over years. So here, what are we doing in that aspect? We are again taking a citizen science approach here, where we communicate to likes of yourselves through open days, through webinars and other media sources. And we ask for a 30+ years old tree in a neighboring area where there were elms and they have died because of the Dutch elm disease. So far, we have got around 80 reports of healthy elms across the country that you can see here on the map. What do? We go there and we take these cuttings, the cutting here on the corner, you can see. We bring them here in our labs and glass houses, and we put them through different media within a glass house, and they start forming the roots, which generated a collection of more than 500 cuttings and trees in our polytunnel, and we have established the first gene bank of putatively tolerant or resistant elms that needs further more testing before we can say that they are highly tolerant or resistant to Dutch elm disease. So this is the work that we are doing in terms of elms, and this brings us to the end of my presentation. And I would like to conclude that there is hope for ash and elms based on the research that other European partners have done and what we have been doing for last number of years, that there are trees in Ireland that show natural tolerance to both diseases, elms for Dutch elm disease and ash for ash dieback. And we should protect those trees, collect the samples and multiply these through propagation methods that I have talked about, grafting initially for ash, and softwood rooting cuttings for elms. Collaboration is the key in this aspect. Your involvement is the most important one because you are our eyes. No matter how big our team is, we cannot reach every hedgerow, every farmland, every garden area, back of the yard where a healthy tree would be surviving that we are not aware of. You are our eyes and ears that will spread our word of work, our work, and report the healthy trees back to us. And the long-term vision is to restore ash and elms as part of Ireland's woodland and hedgerow species. And with this, I would like to thank everyone who is contributing to this research, including Woodlands of Ireland, and to all of you. Thank you very much for listening. Once again, recap of the healthy ash tree and how to report it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dheeraj. And we're going to go to the questions and queries coming up in the chat. So one of the questions that came up there was about giant hogweed. Yes, we saw giant hogweed on two of the hedges, just almost individual plants, but nothing significant except for the fact that it's actually there. There was a query about monuments. Neil, you have a view on that?
Yeah, in terms of monuments, we do a desk survey for each of the hedges. We use GIS to lay out everything for the survey. So every hedge that we sampled, we would have looked at the GIS layer, the sites and monuments record layer, and only one of the hedges that we looked at actually linked into the boundary of any of those features. I've just actually had a quick look at the GIS layer, particularly for the mountain catchment, which was referred to Yes, there's a lot of monuments there. Quite a few of them came close in terms of their buffering area to the hedges that we looked at, but only actually one intersected with the hedge that we were looking at.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Just a question there for Dheeraj on the hotspots areas for ash. Seems to be, is that concentrated down in the southeast, Waterford, Wexford?
It's all over the country. Whosoever appears to agree to keep that piece of land for ash regeneration. So at the moment we have it in Limerick, we have it in I think Cavan, we have two hotspots in Oak Park, one in Dublin. Um, if there is any natural regeneration happening any of the farmland and owners are happy to keep that space, we can definitely go and visit them um, and mark those on our map for regular visits.
And just a question, Dheeraj, on coppicing of elm. Is coppicing something that, say, on a 25 to 30 year rotation, is that something that could prolong the life of elms?
Um, Joe, correct me if coppicing is. I have seen good bit of coppicing happening in alums, and obviously beetle flies above 3 to 5 meters. So there are two beetles. A small beetle flies over 3 meter height, and the large beetle flies over 5 meter height. So if the trees can be kept shorter than that, especially as you mentioned in hedgerows, up to 2 meters height, I think there is a greater chance for the survival of the alums, regardless if they are resistant or not.
Yes, I mean, we saw elm, but only in the shrub layer of hedges in Carlow. We saw relatively frequent elm in the hedgerows from the survey.
You would see
So
a lot more alums these days. I do see it there. But once they reach this height where the beetle flies, and if they are susceptible, they'll get the disease. So if we can keep them within the hedgerow height, they would continue to survive.
Woodlands of Ireland has three other events taking place near next week in Biodiversity Week. And we particularly invite you to Teagasc Oak Park in County Carlow on Friday, May the 22nd at 9:15 a.m. for a co-hosted event with Teagasc. We're looking at hedge habitat zones in a farm landscape featuring an introduction to the hedgerow appraisal system. And we'll also have two short presentations on ash and elm research. Dheeraj, just the names of the two researchers, the PhD researchers that will do the 5 minute presentations.
So
One,
Bailey Park House is working on ash and ash dieback. She will be presenting ash research, and Karuna Srestha is working on alums, and they both will be presenting ash and alum research. Bit more update.
great, yes. And so we found the question, which is
Yeah,
Crail Creek. Do you have an average field size of County Carlow? Is the question.
we don't really, because the nature of the survey was quite specific. It was quite targeted. You would be able to do an average field size if you carried out what would be a normal county-wide survey, where you would do a sample of 1 kilometre squares across the county. So in other county surveys that have been done, it's been possible to produce a sort of a hedgerow density for the county, but the nature of the survey, because it only covered two catchments, and because it wasn't a random sampling methodology, we don't have that average field size. It would certainly vary. What we could do is we could calculate the length of hedgerow on the EPA mapping and work out a hedgerow density from that. We'll have a go at doing that and see if we can publish it somewhere for you.
Thanks, Neil. And thanks, Dheeraj, very much for working with us on this webinar. So join us on May the 22nd, which is International Day for Biological Diversity, which is during National Biodiversity Week. We'll be at Oak Park, Teagasc Oak Park in Carlow for a day of biodiversity talks and field trips with a focus on hedgerows. This event will have presentations on hedgerow appraisal system, survey system, including presentations on the Teagasc research on ash dieback that we mentioned, and also on elm with the researchers there. The day will also include a field trip to nearby hedges. So, Gormo, Agwiv, Galer, thank you very much, and see you soon, hopefully next week in Carlow.